Welcome to this episode of the Voices for Voices TV show and podcast. I'm your host, founder, and executive director of Voices for Voices, Justin Allen Hayes. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are, from a catalog perspective, over 234 episodes on our way to 300 by the end of calendar 2025. I've got a lot of numbers in my head now. And we just want to thank everybody for joining in, whether this is your first episode or whether you've been with us from the beginning. We can't do this without you. As you know, we have the pretty large goal of trying to help 3 billion people over the course of my lifetime and beyond. And can't do that alone. It's a huge, lofty goal. But with collaborating with individuals and organizations, we might just do that over time. And as Voices for Voices was started, right, we're sharing the voices from those who are able to speak, able to share, and many of those that aren't able for a variety of reasons, where sometimes their voice is taken away. And our guest today is just one of those individuals where she not only shares her voice, but she is helping share the voice and have people that may not be able to kind of step forward at the current time to do so. And we're just really thrilled. I have so many notes here, and so we're gonna try to just go at this one step at a time. Our guest, she is a oh my, she's a blogger, she's an author, she's an advocate, she's a mom, and uh, just a little bit of background that uh, One Mom's Battle, which is our guest, Tina Swithin. She started a blog in the 2000s, thinking that she was the only one going through what she was going through. And as we find with a lot of things that we start out thinking that, and then we find out like, oh wow, there's a lot of people that are going through this, and so she's helping a lot of people, not just herself and friends and family, but individuals all across the world. And it's just really an incredible movement that caught the attention of Christy Brinkley. And I'll let her share her story, and we'll start from the beginning. We'll work our way in the current state, and this will be a two-part uh, series for our interview. So you definitely want to tune in for the second part to catch up with where we get for current state, and where Tina sees her movement going. So Tina, thank you so much for joining us from California today.
Yeah, I am honored to be here, grateful for the work you're doing, and humbled to be a part of it in any capacity. So thank you.
You're welcome. Can you maybe just start from the beginning and how you
Yeah,
got passionate and what occurred, and if you're not comfortable sharing, I said don't share. But
I am an open book.
great.
Yeah, so, technically my journey started all the way back in 1974 when I was born. I was born to teen parents. My mom was 16 when she was pregnant. My dad was 18, and he had turned 18 right around the time she got pregnant. And you know, my mom suffered from mental health issues, and back then there really weren't a lot of resources available, and the medications were horrible. She was institutionalized for the first time when I was about 6 months old, and my dad gained custody of me because the home and where my mom lived and what was happening in her life. She was choosing to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, and it was a very unsafe environment for me. So my dad got custody of me when he was 19. And, I say he and I really did grow up together, quite literally. Um, and back then, it was really rare for a father to get custody in the family court system. It was pretty much automated that a mom got custody, which originally she did. So from the time I came into this world, I have been a part of the family court system. And growing up and experiencing the failures firsthand, being sent to stay with my mom for a summer when, addiction issues were rampant. And she actually attempted suicide with me present. I was only 9 years old. Um, there were many things that I was subjected to as a child that I should have never witnessed and I should have never experienced had the court protected me. And so going into my adult life and motherhood, it's a topic, advocating for children and being a voice for children has always been very important to me. I'll tell you that when I got married at the age of 26, I actually didn't want kids. I didn't have solid role models for what it looked like to be a healthy parent, and I did a lot of work in therapy and um, trying to navigate through the experiences that I had as a kid. So when I got pregnant, I was 30 years old, and I wanted to provide so much different for my kids. I envisioned a two-parent household. I really felt that I was making a good choice in a partner. What I have come to realize is that there are unhealthy people in this world who wear a really good mask. And I was projecting who I was and my positive qualities and traits onto somebody who maybe wasn't deserving of that. And yeah, so I found myself in a marriage that it wasn't the same type of abuse that I was familiar with or accustomed to as a child. It looked completely different. This was a person who, by all outward appearances, looked like a pillar of the community, charming, charismatic, had a very good degree and a very good job and career path. And I just thought, I have broken cycles. I am doing what is right and making good choices. Um, and until you wake up one day and, in what I have found in abusive relationships, not only my own, but in so many other stories, is, so many of us give the benefit of the doubt to other people. And in the beginning, and we recognize that we're all flawed humans and that no one's perfect. So we give a lot of grace, the same type that we would ask for in this world. And in the beginning, for so many years, the good outweighs the bad, and sometimes the good is so good that it almost is too good to be true. And that is a lesson I've learned. When something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And so, you wake up one day and realize the bad outweighs the good, but you're in this fog and sometimes not even able to articulate what is happening. And then when it's the abuse is something that's so insidious, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and our society, unfortunately, even present day, doesn't recognize those things. It's a very challenging position to find yourself in.
Wow, that's I mean, harrowing from, like you said, from I'll say day one of being a child and going through that really gave you uh, a perspective of how a relationship could be, and there can be a lot of different reasons for how people act, and as you said, like Salita, nobody's perfect. We all have flaws, but then sometimes we get to a point where, like you said, that bad is just so overwhelming, and it tips the scales. And uh, did when you started to notice that in your your marriage, were you always somebody that was comfortable being the voice of sharing, of stepping forward, of because we understand that in a lot of relationships, like you said, that uh, you know th- we get afraid, and like, oh my gosh, like if I like, do a police report, or however else I step out, the person's going to come after me, and my safety is going to be even more at risk. Uh, how did uh, how did the experience kind of maybe turn you, and maybe you were always a good communicator, outspoken, being able to articulate throughout your life. Because I think a lot of people watching and listening, maybe like, I'm in a similar situation and I don't know what to do. I'm
Oh,
afraid. I don't know how to make a difference, get out of this. Can you maybe
yeah.
share a little bit of that?
Yeah. For one, I'm conflict avoidant by nature. So if you're mad at me, I will be awake at 2 a.m. worrying about it. So I'm very uncomfortable with conflict. And, I often say I went through the first 34 years of my life whispering, afraid to
Mm,
take up any space in the world. And it was only really when my divorce started that I found my voice. And,
mm,
by design, a lot of unhealthy, dysfunctional, abusive relationships, even if you go into it with a voice, you lose your voice over time. And for example, when my ex-husband and I met, I was very embarrassed. My childhood was unconventional. I came from, what would be considered a very broken home, riddled with abuse and toxic behavior and mental health issues and addiction. And he was from this family that, they were very connected in the community, very known in the community. They worked in education. They were, I was very intimidated by this family that on paper looked to be, you couldn't dream of a more perfect family to marry into. And so I felt very intimidated by it, and unworthy, I guess I would say, very insecure. And he put me on a pedestal and made me feel that I was worthy, that he did care, that he wanted to know my thoughts, feelings, all of the things. He said all the right things, he did all of the right things. But then what I came to realize is that by putting me up on that pedestal, he was in full control. And if you pull out the domestic violence wheel, power and control wheel, my story was a perfect example of that. The first stage is isolation. He moved me 4 hours away from my friends and family, and I was in a very vulnerable position. I had grown up very a blue collar family. My dad was a single working dad. He workaholic because he didn't have a choice. We were sometimes, barely making it to the next paycheck. There were times where my dad was unhoused and I would be sent to live with friends or family members because we didn't even have a home. So then being thrust into this lifestyle where my ex-husband really used his money and, flashiness and this lifestyle, he would go out and buy 3 cars in one day. I could never understand why one human needed 3 cars, and it was a different world. And it made me very uncomfortable because it was so foreign. And anytime I questioned something, he would say, over time, as the abuse became more rampant. If I questioned something, he would say, you have no business questioning this. You don't understand how the world works. This is how normal people operate. You're white trash was one of his favorite digs to make at me. So over time, I, not only lost my voice, I stopped questioning anything and gave him my trust because it was much easier to do than challenging him. And over time, in our case, finances were a huge issue. We lived this, what I now know to be, I call it my fake fancy life, this huge home in a gated community. There were actual guards at the gate of the community. And, all these cars and a live-in nanny and a private chef. And, I was completely kept in the dark financially until the IRS showed up at my house and I found out that we were almost $2 million in debt and all behind my back. So did I always have a voice? Absolutely not. When our divorce started and I started regaining my footing and learning, who I was, that I didn't know who I was married to, that I had fallen in love with a facade and that this person was very much a con artist. I started to find my voice, and now it's almost as if someone has put a bullhorn in my hand, a megaphone, and I'm making up for lost time because to know me now, you wouldn't even recognize who I was 15 years ago when my divorce started.
Yeah, and I think having somebody who's prominent in the community and connected makes things even tougher because you're almost battling, well, several fights, the relationship, but then almost like the community that if you were to step out at that time, people may have, I don't say frowned upon, like, oh yeah, right, he's doing
Yes.
this and that, and he's prominent, and so we're not gonna believe you, we're gonna
Right.
believe him.
Yeah, and I say that, I was complicit in creating a facade that we were the perfect couple, that we were the perfect family, because it was, there's who he was behind closed doors was not who he was in public. And so when we were in public, that version of him, that's what I wanted. And when I thought back to our earliest days dating and who he was back then, when he presented in a very, charming, charismatic way in public, it gave me hope that that person was still in there. That person that I fell in love with was still there. And all I had to do was be nicer, prettier, thinner, all of the things that he expected of me. But that, it gave me a false sense of hope. Now I understand that that was the public mask. And I learned that over time, but that was what I craved is the person I originally fell in love with. And it is, it takes a toll on your mental health to be living this double life. And when I went along with the program and presented as this loving, happy couple, he was kinder to me. And watching my in-laws, that is very much, he wanted me to be who his mom was. And now what I recognize his mom to be is almost, in my opinion, more unhealthy than the rest of the family because she knew how sick many of the family members were. And she worked overtime to cover everything up, to make everything shiny and pretty from the outside, and really kept everything behind closed doors. That wasn't who I was. It was eating me alive to have this double life, this public image, and then the reality. And I'm sure there are people who will go along with that program because that's all they've ever known. It was not me. And I became almost a threat to the family because I would stand up and say, but this isn't okay, or voice my opinion, or say, no, my daughters are not going to be around that family member. I don't care that we need pretty pictures for the holiday card, And so, I did. And when you go through this type of relationship and eventually divorce, you aren't just up against one unhealthy person. It is truly the entire family that comes together as a united force against you, and you're the target. And it's not, any divorce is difficult, but with this type of family, when everything is writing on their image, and on, keeping a person who is a threat or is seen behind the masks, keeping that person quiet, it's a terrifying path to walk on.
Sure. Uh, you touch on mental health. Uh, it, were you able to, if you wanted to, seek therapy, or was that kind of shunned upon, like, oh, no, we're not going to do that? Uh,
Yeah, good question. So, interesting question. So, I begged for therapy for the last couple of years of my marriage. And
mhm,
the message that I constantly received was, together, we don't need counseling. You need counseling. You're the problem. And I
yeah,
got to the point where I thought, maybe I am. And, so towards the very end of our marriage, 2008, after the IRS came in and froze everything, I ended up desperately calling different therapists. One person ended up answering the phone and saying, I actually just had a new client canceled today. I have a 90-minute slot if you
okay,
want to come in. And I said, absolutely. So I drove to this woman's office in just this place of desperation. And I remember her asking me different questions. One of them had to do with my pregnancy. How was pregnancy? How was childbirth experience? And I was sharing with her that my husband, now ex-husband, was very big into triathlons. And it was very inconvenient. The timing of my pregnancy happened to fall exactly when his big annual triathlon was. So I left the hospital both times with newborn babies, staples from a C-section,
mm,
and went camping for 4 days in an RV and cooked a pasta feed dinner for 15 people with a newborn and staples, because of what an inconvenience I was. And I was just trying to do anything at that point to gain his approval. And I remember her face just looking at me horrified, and her continuing to ask questions and me just emotionally vomiting on this
mhm,
woman. And towards the end, she got up, quite, she didn't say a word. She got up, she walked across the room, she came back with a DSM-5, opened it
mhm,
up, and to narcissistic personality disorder, which back in, now the term is overused and
yeah,
everybody is a narcissist, if you go online. But I had never heard the term back then. We weren't talking about these things. And I remember her pointing to it and saying, I can't diagnose him. I'm not qualified and I've never met him. However, what you're describing leads me to believe that this person is highly narcissistic, possibly sociopathic. And I remember reading it, and this will give you insight into where my mind was at the time. I was so excited because I thought, this is it. This makes more sense than anything I've ever heard. And if we have a label and a title, we can fix him.
yeah,
Just tell, I am a fixer. Back then I was,
mhm,
in my mind, she gave me so much hope until I said, great, what do we do now? And she looked at me and she said, you either accept that this is your life because this type of person is not capable of changing, or you tighten up your shoes and you get out because this is going to be your life. You have to either accept it or get out. And I left there upset and angry. Like, how dare she say I can't fix him? I went home. I actually told him, I know what's wrong with you. And we
mhm,
Googled it together. And I remember him going, that sounds just like my dad, but it's not me. But that even gave me more hope because I thought
Hmm.
if he recognizes that this is his dad, he and his dad are the same person. So we're one
Hmm.
step closer. Um, I got to the point where I wanted to end the marriage. He finally agreed to go to therapy with me, but he insisted on a male PhD. That is the only person he would
Hmm.
see. And we did that for about 6 months before the psychologist said, I really think you need a psych eval. I think the issues here are bigger than what I can solve in my office.
Wow, it's intense, and to know that you went through that, and it made it through, because a lot of people, no, I don't say like a lot, but some people, you know, like look at taking their own life and do different things that are, yeah, like, oh, I'm the problem, it's all me,
Oh,
this is what I'm being told, and you know, I can't get out of this.
yeah,
am embarrassed that therapy has this connotation,
right.
like, oh, like, why do you have to go to therapy? And it's just incredible that you got through that, even with all the turbulence, the ups and the downs. And it is very interesting when you went home and told him about that, and he said, "No, that's just like my dad," and they gave more insight that kind of probably runs in the family.
Oh yeah, it's a very deep line of, a lot of issues. But yeah, and interestingly enough, when we did that 6 months of marriage therapy with a male psychologist, when the male psychologist said, I really recommend a psych eval, and he had said to him, I hear you continuously saying that you're sorry, but I don't believe you really are. I think those are empty words. And that was so validating for me to hear because I had experienced so much gaslighting and being told that I was the problem, that to hear this person say that, it was worth every copay for six
Mhm.
months to hear that. But interestingly enough, that day was the day that my ex-husband said our marriage is over. He accused me of manipulating the
Mhm.
psychologist into believing my side of the story. Um, and I thought, wow, I have a lot of power to
Mhm.
to manipulate a trained clinical psychologist. But it was a threat to him for someone of that caliber to see behind his mask and to call him out on those things. And his defense mechanisms automatically kicked in. But, I had worked so hard to keep the relationship. I didn't want my little girls to go through a divorce. I
Mhm.
didn't want them to bounce back and forth. But I will tell you, when he called it and said, we're done, it was one of the biggest reliefs of my entire life, because I just thought it's the point of that I have avoided for so I didn't ever want to get to that point of no return. But now that he said it, this is it. And I have some big choices to make.
Wow. I think this is a good place to conclude this first episode. I feel like
Okay.
we're on the precipice of getting to where your voice is starting, and then the impact that it had and is, and uh, getting Chrissy Brinkley's attention, and just having that support with you, and then how you're continuing to help, and not only help the victims of people that are in those positions, but also calling out the judicial justice system when there are judges that are overstepping, or what have you, and not really I don't say they're not nice people, but the rulings and the way that they go about things could be handled much differently. And I think that that's huge, and that was uh, one of the areas when I saw your post, that you are coming straight out, and when you're saying it as it is, you're putting pictures, you're putting, hey, email, call, send us information, and that is just amazing that you got to and you're at that point, because that's probably how change and how you're giving a voice not only to yourself but to others that maybe have been impacted by those judges, those individuals, those supposed advocates. Yeah. Uh, so we'll close out this episode, and if you're watching, listening, come back for part two. It's going to be just as riveting, and get to where we're at current state, with Tina, also online. You've probably heard of her under One Mom's Battle, reaching and supporting, 250,000 people, and that's just the amount I probably know about, and there's probably a lot more that you're having a positive influence on. So we invite you to come back for the second part of this episode, with Tina Swithin, and we just want to thank her for her time out of a busy Friday to talk and share, and uh, you know continue to share her voice and to help others. So thanks, Tina. We'll see you
Thank
on
you.
the second episode.
Thank you.
All right.